Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. Today I'm sitting down with one of the most caring, dependable, and fun women who I have had the pleasure of working alongside in child and adolescent mental health for several years. Angela Hick, or as I like to call Angie, is a clinical social worker with a master's degree in social work and has a postgraduate diploma in couple and family therapy from the University of Calgary. She has worked as a therapist in a children's mental health setting for 9 years with a focus on parent-child relationship issues, risky behaviors, sexual behavioral problems, and substance use. Angie is a wife and a mother to her toddler son. She's also a dog mom to a rescue pit bull, and in her very rare spare time, she likes to cook, ski, play slow pitch, and play on a women's hockey team. So, Angie, welcome. I'm so thrilled to sit down with you today. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks. Exciting to be here.
It's I was very honored when I reached out and you were so quick to say, yeah, sure, I'll do this with you. Meant a lot. So particularly because this show is all about bettering ourselves, and I'm on this journey to find all sorts of ways to be a better person, whether that's a mom, wife, whatever else you want to put in there. And I think you agreeing as a therapist and having you on today is a really good opportunity to talk about the things as a therapist. You're also a mom, how those things come together, or sometimes in my world clash. And also I think an opportunity for folks out there to feel connected. That's sort of what we're doing here. It's all about sharing and connecting so that we don't feel isolated and understand that we can talk to other people. So thank you so much again for being here. Okay, so I want to try this segment with you.
Sure.
I've been doing this in the last few episodes. I believe you're episode 5, but I don't know. That's subject to change. I'm figuring all this out. So basically what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you something that you would like to put your middle finger up to. It could be something that's happened recently or something that happened a long time ago, but something that you want to put your middle fingers up to. Yeah.
Daycare germs, by far. That is like 2. Can I do 2 middle fingers up?
You know what? You can do 3 if you wanted to. You can use your toes.
Okay, yeah. Daycare germs have been like the worst, and watching my son build his immune system has been pretty painful, and like a lack of sleep. So,
I can imagine. And daycare germs when my kids were little was one thing, but for you having daycare germs in the world post-COVID and all of these different health issues that are continuing to come out. So I can appreciate that pain, and I'm sorry for you, man.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And you know, what's interesting is my middle fingers up is actually very similar along the lines of what you're saying. But what I want to put my middle finger up to is, I guess, what felt like this cryptic email I received, most of us parents probably received from the Calgary Board of Education last week. And it was about the continuing in-school education that's going to be what the school board's going to support, because, as you know, the numbers are going up again with COVID. I think there's strep throat and this respiratory thing that young people and elders are experiencing. And the particular part that I want to put my middle finger up to is like this anxiety when I read that email, because it took me back to 2020 when we got that email, and then shortly after we ended up having to do in-home schooling. Yeah. So I'm getting that, jumping ahead and that anticipation of, oh my God, if they're sending us an email saying they're going to keep kids in school, then that's not happening. So middle fingers up to the health issues and the germs out there, and hopefully people are able to keep their kids and themselves healthy, because it's getting bad again. So yes. I feel the hospital rooms.
Yeah, staying calm in times of uncertainty, I guess, is like always a challenge.
I love you in your therapist ways, because you say that so well, and you're right. It is. How do you how do you accept that you don't have control over whatever crisis you're experiencing, or like you said, in times of uncertainty, when that's all you're trying to find is where can I know, where can I be in control? And I appreciate that. That's a good message of how do you stay calm? What do you need to do to stay calm? Which is kind of along the lines of what we're talking about today. A big reason why one of many big reasons and exciting reasons that I asked for you to join me today, as I mentioned earlier, Angie is a clinical social worker and has a lot of experience working. You have a lot of experience working with caregivers, so that's parents, family members, and their children to address mental health disruptions and issues that are occurring in the home. And while that's, lovely to have you want to talk about that, I think where I'd like to start with you is talking about you and your personal experiences of becoming a mom. Like, is it just, I guess I'm selfish, I want to know, is it just as tough for you as it was for me when I thought I was so good at my job and I knew what I was doing, as a counselor? And then I have these kids and I feel like I have imposter syndrome. I'm like, what am I doing? Because whatever I'm talking about at work isn't translating at home. So curious, what was pregnancy and birth? What was that like for you?
Well, I definitely went in with certain expectations and kind of like these messages that society would tell me about. It's a magical time and it's going to be so great. And it was not like that for me, even from like the earliest part of my pregnancy. Like I was quite ill throughout. It really impacted my life. I could barely work, and I wasn't feeling those kind of like lovey-dovey pregnancy experiences.
You didn't have the glow?
No, I did not have the glow
that they all say we do.
Right. Like I had trouble keeping food down. Like it was pretty terrible. And like I can remember everybody like tried to make me feel better. It didn't really like help. Yeah. And there was like one therapist that I worked with, and she too had a difficult pregnancy, and I got a little vulnerable with her one day, and I said, is this worth it? Like, would you do this again? And she said, I would do it 100 times over. And I was like, okay, like, even though I'm not feeling connected to my baby, I'm having a terrible time. Yeah. There's someone who's like farther ahead from me who is like, yeah, absolutely, you're going to get through this, and this is going to be like pretty incredible, even though it's terrible right now.
Yeah. And you know what? I love those people in our lives, because sometimes I call them our future. Yeah. you know, and I'm your past, you're my future. Like, what would you want to tell your past self? Tell me. Yeah. And what can I ask you about my future? Because I think sometimes we think what we're experiencing is just what I'm going through. And because we don't talk about it, we don't realize that, oh my God, so many other people around me have had similar experiences or worse, or, you know, it helps to lessen the guilt, because you're right, it's supposed to be this magical time, and you had this gift of getting pregnant. Mm-hmm. And yep. So, you know, I just did a fertility episode recently, and, you know, that's a trigger for a lot of women that are trying to get pregnant when they see women around them, and yet sometimes seeing them not embracing it. Because we're in two different paths. And I think as someone that's in your place, I would imagine it's the guilt of, I should be excited. Where do I buy the oil to put the glow on? Yeah. And in the end, when we reach out to other people, how much of a relief is it to hear, oh, okay, this is okay to feel this way, and that connection will come at some point.
Yeah, totally. And like that continued on with like my son's birth. There was like lots of difficulties, ended up with like an emergency C-section because he had low fluid and was wrapped up tight in the cord. We like affectionately call him Batman, because he's like wrapped up like a little bat. Yeah. And so that process of like intending to have a more natural birth and having certain preferences that were just not possible for like a variety of reasons was pretty hard, especially like I have all this knowledge about attachment. I did a bunch of research about the birth and how I could like kind of set my son off on like a good start.
Because you're going to do it different. You're going to do it different than what probably a lot of your clients have taught you. And what happens, you know, we both saw this when we were working together, young people that don't have caregivers, and the attachment was lost long before they were even born. And the impact that has on us later in our years. And for the sake of saying attachment, can you help me explain what we're talking about? What are we saying? What does this mean?
Yeah, I think when I think about attachment, I think of like connection, and it's kind of like this invisible cord between like parent and child. Mm-hmm. I think like an obvious representation is like when you think of attachment between like a mother, mm-hmm. Someone who like carried the baby. There's that kind of like invisible cord that's like reminiscent of like umbilical cord. Yeah. But I think of it as like this bond between parent and child, and it like throughout someone's lifespan there's like these little like ruptures, mm-hmm. or that cord kind of frays a bit, and then you have to do some repair. It's not just this thing I think that you can take for granted. It's mm-hmm. actually something that's a lot of work. Yeah
Well, I mean, we're both living it, so yeah. I can totally appreciate where you're coming from. And I think your stage, the toddler stage, the infancy stage, where they can't tell us what we're hoping, to hear from them. It's so hard to know what's going on. I think was one of the most difficult times for me. I hated the 0 to 5 stage. I hated that. I hated it. Yeah. And I also, I was like, I should be enjoying this, because especially when I had my second son, it's like, this is my last baby. Right. We're not having any more, because my husband said, oh yeah, we can have a third, but we're not going to be able to go on vacations. It'll be all camp trips. We won't be able to afford beautiful vacations with 3. And as you know me, I hate camping. Yeah. So it's like, okay, we'll keep it at 2. Yeah. But so kind of grieving that, I'm not going to go through that pregnancy process again. But yet I still hated it, because I never knew. I never got the validation from my child. I never knew if I was hitting the mark or not. Right. And it was scary because of what we're supporting at work, with the staff we work with the families, with the young people that would show up. And you're like, what do I do to make sure I'm making good, conscious parenting decisions so my kid feels the love and knows it? And are you experiencing that at all? Yeah,
and I think it's definitely gotten better over time. Like in the very beginning, like the early weeks with my son, like my hormones were kind of going a bit bananas, as they do for everybody, and it was really hard for me to think about like any kind of bid for attachment or connection, or my son saying like, hey, I have a need that needs to be met. I wanted to meet it immediately, or like before he even asked me, like anticipating his needs. Yeah. And I was really like that was draining. Like there were times like I would feel guilty about like he would cry and I'd have to like go to the bathroom and to like take care of myself first. That was like a really hard thing to do at first, and I was really lucky that I had a really great therapist who helped me through that. And I also a lot of my friends happened to be therapists. One friend's a child protection worker, and they would kind of like make fun of me a little bit, like in like a loving, caring, supportive way, about like, okay, like you are not traumatizing your kid by like taking care of yourself before like grabbing him a bottle.
Did you find that helpful, hearing that?
Yeah, like at first I was kind of maybe a little bit irritating.
Like you don't know, I know my kid, like I know better kind of irritating?
Yeah, or like I don't think you're understanding the seriousness of it. Yes. But then like I started thinking, okay, like there's something here. I can do something different, and I like relaxed a bit.
Totally.
So.
It's funny because I say funny because for me it was so similar. When I returned from maternity leave back to work, I, as you know, love fashion, and I thought, I get to dress these boys and it's like these cool styles. And so I would layer my poor kids up with like sweaters and shirts and all sorts of things that sweaty babies don't like to wear. And I think by the time my oldest, Xander, was about 2 or 3, he started to, like, he was refusing to wear the clothes that I want him to, he's like, no, I'm just living in shorts and sweatpants. And actually he still lives in shorts and sweatpants. And I remember going to work and talking to my supervisor and some colleagues about, oh my gosh, like I think I need to get a referral and assess Xander. I think he's hypersensitive to certain textures, which in our world, in our shop talk world, that's usually a symptom for a young person or a person that may be experiencing like diagnosis of being on the spectrum of autism,
or like a sensory processing issue.
Exactly, like too much noise, our five senses, right? And so I remember I was on the phone with my supervisor. She was away in another program, and we were doing a phone supervision. And so I'm like super like, oh my gosh, I got to get on this because, I'm such a good mom.
Yeah.
And literally silence on the other end. And she finally, I'm like, hello. And she bursts out laughing. And I'm like, what? Because I'm devastated. And she's like, I wish I could record you and you could hear yourself. Because your son won't wear those mustard skinny jeans, you want to assess him for what? And I'm like, okay. When she said that, at first, the same thing, I was like, I'm not explaining myself well. And then after the end of the conversation, I was like, wait a minute. All I needed in that moment was someone to say, you're not crazy. Mm-hmm. You're overthinking this. All the things that she did do.
Too close, probably.
Totally. Yeah. There's a client, exactly. Whatever themes I'm experiencing at work are hitting too close. And so I remember going home, or on the way home, I went to like Old Navy or H&M or something and like literally bought my son sweatpants because I was like, I need to go with his flow.
Yeah.
And I think that's sometimes the lovely thing about parenting, but also it's like a double-edged sword because your flow is not your kid's flow. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of what we're talking about today is like, how do we connect our flow and our kids and how do we build these healthy relationships with them and how can we be aware of them? And when we're overthinking it, hopefully we have people in our village that put us in our place and say, listen, you're needing some sleep because this is, overreacting. So, so what else comes to your mind when you share your stories about your little guy? Because he's at a toddler state now.
Yeah.
So do you feel like you're getting better with the overthinking piece, or like because you've also you actually returned early back to work from maternity leave too, right?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, So talking about attachment and all that, and then coming to work early, and it sounds like you were really I don't know what the word is, but overthinking is what we keep saying about what is my attachment going to be like, yet you're making this decision to return to work early.
Yeah, well, and I think that happened for a variety of reasons. One of the things that I really thought long and hard about is what does my son need to have like a healthy mother? Mm-hmm. And I'm a person who I'm programmed to work, and I love my work. And
you're really, so good at it, man.
Well, thank you. And it's something I get a lot of satisfaction of, and I was really lucky that I came back part-time. Mm-hmm. My employer was like really excited about that, made accommodations for me, and the caregiver who kind of like stepped in when I couldn't be there was my mom. Oh. So I didn't feel like I sacrificed that attachment relationship. I feel like I kind of like gave an opportunity for like my mom to have a relationship with him in a different way. Yeah. And I think part of like my goal for my son's life is to have like a lot of people who love him. Yeah. I don't see me having to be the primary, like I know that I just naturally am the primary attachment figure, myself and my husband, but we're also lucky that we have a lot of family locally. Yeah. All of his grandparents have different gifts, aunts, uncles, who can kind of teach him different things, and I think that's a real blessing for him. So it just like worked out for us that I was able to do that. Yeah. Well, then what I hear you talking about, there's the work hat now, your secure attachment. Yeah. Right. There's insecure and there's secure. And what you're talking about is exposing your son to healthy people at an early age that he can build that trust with and rely on others. And what's so interesting about that is it's parallel to why I'm doing this passion project is somewhere along the line we lose that. Somewhere along the line we lose all of those people or, that we've been exposed to, those of us that have, not all of us have had the privilege of having a village. But I believe, that if you have one person, that's a village. You have one person on your side. And I think a lot of times as we're getting older, we lose, like coming to where we're at now, lose that voice reaching out and asking for help or talking to others or continuing to build that secure attachment. We become more and more isolated as we get older. And so I think it's a nice reminder that we want to start this at an early age where our kids can
be comfortable being left at a daycare or with a friend or a babysitter or what, you know, because it's not necessarily for you. It's actually you're doing this for them.
Mm-hmm. And I think, like, I reflect on my own childhood. I always had, like, my mom always worked, and I had caregivers, and one of the things that she said to me is just making sure that the person you're trusting your kids with is someone you can trust, and like building that relationship. And I do feel like my son's now in a daycare setting, and I feel like we have that with them. And then he's still, you know, grandma, you know, couldn't care for him full time, but you know, his grandparents are able to pick him up early.
Well, they can be grandparents, which is nice too, you know, to do the grandparent thing versus being a, you know, and
like a parent and someone who, like, if you're with a kid all day, you just naturally have to do some of the disciplining and the shaping and those kind of things that, you know, has those little, like, ruptures in attachment that then you have to repair.
Right. What do you mean by that, actually, when you say that you have to repair?
So I think of, like, my son right now is going through a stage where he's hitting our dog. Oh. Like, and it's pretty bad, and our dog has been lovely.
Like, is he angry when he's doing it? Or
he's like excited, but she's like clearly uncomfortable, and we're trying to teach him that boundary, and like he is like a year and a half old, so he does not get it, but also we have to like manage that relationship with him and the dog is like has so much patience, so we have to you know, do things like give him like a little mini timeout of 1 minute. Like they say, developmentally appropriate timeouts is 1 minute per year of your age.
So like I would need 41 minutes?
Yes. And maybe in your case a little bit more.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So we do little things like that, and it's quite distressing for him. He gets upset. He doesn't like his activities to be interrupted. So he's, you know, mad. And then we have to like find some time to kind of repair that relationship. And it's like we do that as we go along. And so we find that there hasn't, like, he appears to be like really securely attached.
What I appreciate about what you're saying when you say repair is that, like you mentioned, you know, your childhood, and even coming from my background, learning through my upbringings and working mental health, a lot of kids don't get that full start to finish, you know, follow through. And so what you're teaching him is to take responsibility at a young age in a scenario where he can, but also go back and apologize in his way as well. And I think with the time that you and I have spent working in the setting we often didn't see young people having been taught what it is to be apologized to, and then being able to take responsibility. And that was really important for me too, because I think my parents and my aunts and uncles and, you know, even grandparents felt the need to repair something or felt like apologizing, but it just didn't always come up. And pride, ego, all sorts of things kick in for us. And if we can start at a young age. And also I think like we say sorry a lot in our house, because I fuck up a lot in my house. And I just want my kids as well to see, okay, mom's not perfect, papa's not perfect, but they always come back to it. They always come back to having this conversation with us, because that's sort of what we want to see them do as well, is, you know, come back to, okay, I'm sorry that happened, or I slammed my door or whatnot. And it's really nice to be receiving that now with the boys. Like we see that they get upset, they go to their room, do their thing, and then a few minutes later, hour later, sometimes even the day after, but it's coming back to, let's talk about what happened so we can do better next time.
And I think like a lot of parents, like the age I work with is typically adolescence, and that's a really rocky time for a lot of parents, and for the teens too. I think that not role modeling it makes it so much harder to teach later on. And then parents are frustrated with their kids not being accountable. They're refusing to take responsibility for things. And that's something that is taught and role modeled. Like any kind of skill, like being able to regulate your emotions is something that you learn. The same thing with empathy in the context of relationships.
So let's break that down a little bit. What do you mean about empathy, and what do you mean about, you were just saying?
empathy and emotional regulation.
Thank you. Emotional regulation. It's been a minute since I've been at work. So, as you know, I haven't been there since June. So what do you mean by emotional regulation?
I think it's the ability to manage really tough feelings or really exciting feelings. Like sometimes we see kids get really, really excited and they can't cope and they can't manage
like Halloween for every household with kids?
Halloween. Families who celebrate Christmas. That would be another, like the day before Santa Claus comes, it's like meltdown city.
Totally.
And then you have
parents too.
Just like so much is happening. Right? So it's the ability to like manage and tolerate these feelings that are intense and to do something, I guess that goes into distress tolerance. So being able to withstand a really difficult emotion, I think, without doing something like really scary or risky or destructive.
So, which is interesting because I think we'll probably go back and forth and refer to the brain. Like sometimes for me, when I know through my schooling and the work that I've done and everything that staff and clients have taught me over the years, I understand that, okay, this isn't personal and this is happening because this young person's brain is actually at a place where one part of the brain is being accessed more than another because that other part that isn't being accessed is growing. And, research is now saying the brain is developing until we're 40. And finally, I have a developed brain, but I'm sure in a year, another article will tell me I have a lot, 20 more years to go. But sometimes for me, when I'm at home, I struggle to bring that knowledge, right? Because I'm a mom, and like you said earlier, that connection that I'm plugged in. And so often not often, I should do it more often, but what I do is I'll try to go back and just read a little bit about the brain. And I think sometimes it's such an overlooked part of us, and we get so connected to the emotional side. Like, again, that kid that you're talking about with their struggle to regulate emotionally is having this tantrum and is acting out before Halloween. And now parents might say, if you don't get it together, you're not going to go trick-or-treating because, get it together or calm down or whatever it is. And I think sometimes what's helpful is to go back and look at where is the brain at. Like you talked about adolescents, they're going through a really big developing brain time just like a baby is. They're kind of redoing it. So it's like cleaning out your closet. Their brain is basically saying, well, you were taught this one skill as a kid, which was to, I don't know, help me out here. What's a skill that we're taught when we're young?
Like how to tie your shoes.
Yeah, okay. But you haven't done it forever. And, I have one, skating. I was really good at skating as a kid.
Oh, really?
Hadn't done it forever. If I were to put on my skates now, you would think I've never skated in my life.
Bambi on ice.
100% Bambi on ice. And so the brain starts to say, you don't use this anymore. Let's throw it out now. And you start to, your brain continues to rewire in all sorts of ways. But for teenagers at that time, they're accessing the emotional part of the brain. So no wonder the emotional regulation, like you're talking about, is being affected, and we're having tantrums, or their teens are doing really scary, risky things. That impulse control starts to kick in more so than the part of the brain that we use a little bit later, which is, if I get in the car with this person who's been drinking, it may not go well. But as a teenager, it's
also exciting.
Exactly, right? And so I guess. And what I'm saying is going back and reading about how the brain works at each age can help us understand where a kid is coming from, because behavior has meaning. It's not just, I'm going to tantrum. Your son isn't just hitting the dog because he is this evil supervillain, right? He would be the cutest evil supervillain, though, man, those eyes. So what are your thoughts? I guess put on your therapist hat. Like, what are your thoughts about what I'm saying? Like, what would you, in your experience working with young people and their developing brains, what are some things that you see that can be helpful when we're teaching our kids to regulate their emotion?
Well, I think if you think about the process of the part about that it's something that's learned and is in the context of relationships, that means that the person who's like teaching that kid how to manage their feelings needs to be calm and regulated themselves. If you're at a place where you're like stressed, frantic, we see this with parents who, life happens, they're grieving, or they're going through like very serious adult circumstances of like divorce, financial concerns, families who are going through really tough things. It's understandable that you would not be able to regulate, but it's important that you're trying to figure out how you can manage yourself so that you can guide and teach your kid. And for some people, nobody showed them how to do it.
Right.
So then you're on this like kind of parallel journey of trying to figure out like how do you teach yourself and then how do you teach your kid? And
Totally.
That can be really challenging.
Totally. You said so much, and I'm like, thank you for everything you just said, because really what I'm hearing you say is it starts with me.
Yeah.
So I think you were telling me too, when your son was an infant, there were times when you would notice when you were having a good day, he was having a good day.
Yeah.
So is that what you're saying here?
Yeah, and I would try to like capitalize on that time. Like, hey, we're both having a good day, but also what are the ingredients of me having a good day? Because that means he has a good day, and then we have a better time together.
So you're asking yourself, what is happening different today than yesterday that was a bad day? Like, what am I doing? So is it that I got more sleep? Is it that I showered? Is it that I ate? So just even those basic needs. Yeah. Is it that you had some kind of quality time with your partner or, a friend or a loved one so you can get some validation and, feel okay, really revived in a way? What else? Like, what are the things that are happening today for me that are helping me have a good day? And recognizing that this is actually making my kid's day better. Because sometimes as parents, we think the reverse. We think my kid's having a tantrum all day today, and now I'm so tired, and his tantruming is affecting me, without thinking maybe there's something I'm doing that's like encouraging or causing that tantrum.
Well, and I think it's like in our society we get caught up in blame.
Yeah.
Especially, yes. I've seen this or maybe like as a professional, I've been part of it, like blaming parents for their child's misbehavior. And I don't think that gives us any place to go to, right? We're just kind of stuck, and then the parent feels like garbage. Like for my situation, I'd be like, okay, my son is having a terrible day. I'm having a terrible day. This all sucks. It's so hard. Yeah. To think about like, okay, in this situation, what do I control?
Right.
I control myself. I do not control what that tiny, high energy, curious human does. Like, right. I don't control, like, there's certain things I'm in charge of, but he's often doing his own thing a lot of the time. And by controlling, like, making choices for myself, that's one, like, end of the, like, relationship that I can manage and have change and I don't know, I'm not really...
No, you're doing a really good job, because I think what you're doing is you're backing up what you said earlier, and you're saying role model.
Yeah.
So sometimes we want our kids to just know, and, like my husband and I and my oldest got into this little tiff. Like my last episode, my middle finger up was going to my budding tweens hormones.
Yeah.
And so Xander and Carrie get into this little thing, and it matters not that it's Xander and Carrie, because it could have been Xander and I. They're getting into this little thing in the morning. And what my husband in the moment, and I do this too, what he wants is my son to respond in a certain way, but the way that he's talking to him is the complete opposite. And my son, because he's something for sure. He's a cheeky smart, little, his response to his papa is, learn how to talk to me. And then he walked out the door and slammed the door and went to school. And, my husband and I, I give Carrie some time, whatever we come back to. And so I check in with him. Like, how are you? Because I from where I'm standing in that moment, I just happened to be a bystander. I wasn't the one having the argument for once. But when I'm watching it, I'm like watching this movie, right? Where I'm watching the part of the movie that I know what's going on better than the actual characters of the movie. Totally have perspective. And he's not wrong.
Yeah.
You know, like, and because the next response would have been, don't talk to me, don't be disrespectful. But we're also being disrespectful to him. And I think in my upbringing and the generations before me, it was, you know, kids didn't have a voice, and it was speak when spoken to, and we don't have feelings. In fact, years ago, you know, as I'm a Indian woman, I talk about, I always have to do the threading of the unibrow. Yeah. I was at this eyebrow place, and I had my son and my newborn. So Terrence was newborn in the car seat, and Xander was 3. And I was waiting, and the woman, Indian woman, I didn't realize, listening to Xander and I talk. And Xander was asking me some questions, and I was responding, and I was asking him questions. And she pulled me aside later, and she's like, oh my God, like, I am watching you talk to your son, and you're talking to him like he's a person.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, she's like, you know, like, because I wouldn't know any better. I'm talking to him the way that I would want to be talked to. But when she said that, I'm like, yeah, that's right. Because even in my culture, and in a lot of our cultures, we grow up not as a person. We don't get our voice till way later. And when it's way later, we don't even know what our voice is.
Yeah.
And so a lot of us are raising our kids to have voices at young ages. And I think on one hand, that's lovely. But on the other hand, I think, you know, it's
a balance.
It's a balance. Yeah. And so with Xander, you know, my husband and I process, and kudos to Carrie to be able to come to a place, check that ego at the door, and say, yeah, like, I have to go back to that conversation. So, you know, they went back, they processed it. By process, I mean, talked about what happened. And even though we want to tell our kid, you could have done this, and that different, it's like, these are the things that I could do different, because we're trying to role model and show him that we can take responsibility and learn, but also teach him. And I think sometimes we mix up how to teach these things to our kids, right? We expect them to just know, or like you said, bring in our own upbringings and perspectives of the world and how we were raised.
Yeah, and I think we all, because of our experiences as children, have an idea of, like, you know, when I have kids, I'm going to do it this way.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be the best. Yeah. I'm not a regular mom. I'm a cool mom, you know?
and then you have these moments where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm my mother.
Yes.
Like, or I'm like, I am like my dad right now. Like, how did this happen?
Like, I need to call my mom right now. And I've done this a few times where I'm like, I'm sorry. I know what you were trying to do in that situation. Yeah. And I'm just, 15-year-old Kieran's just going to tell you she was sorry about that, because you're experiencing it in such a different way, and you're getting back from your child. I always find I see my worst qualities first in my children. And so, but yet you're trying to build this connection with your child at the same time. You know, like for me, as I have a budding tween, as you know, I left my job in end of May, beginning of June. And like you talk about your career, it was a very important, like my identity was my career. And it was important for me to see my children, my boys, who, you know, as you know, are half white. Carrie and I are in this interracial relationship. And I want them to see their minority mom being successful, wearing her blazers, going to work, doing her thing. And it was really, you know, a few things happened recently. I talk about them in a couple of the episodes that allowed me to get to this place where I was like, where am I going? Like, what am I doing with how I want to parent? Because I'm so in the moment sometimes, because I'm working and my job requires me. I didn't have a 9-to-5 kind of a job. My job was 24/7. And it worked to a point, but as my kids are getting older, I think they're becoming more aware. So we're so worried about this attachment when they're babies.
Yeah.
And, you know, we need to make sure they understand who we are, we're their parents. But then they get to this age as they get older, and you're redoing it again. And I didn't want my kids to not have me around. Like, I didn't want them to think, oh yeah, it's great you're going to work, but where are you when I need you? So I've been home now since, you know, I got no job. And so I've been home for almost 6 months, and it's been very interesting being able to take what I thought was really good, my job, but to take that out of the picture and have this kind of time where I can be more planful with my kids and intentional in the way of how do I want this conversation to go?
Right.
Like, what do I want to leave my kid with? And I know everybody doesn't have that, option. Lucky for me, I'm very fortunate that I could leave my job to be more present in my kids' lives. But like sometimes I worry, can I undo some of those things? Like, can I undo the presence that I didn't have? Can I undo some of that stuff? And do you come across that at work where parents are like, I want to make a change. I want to do something different. And is it too late?
I don't think it's ever too late.
Yeah.
Like, truly, I think the important thing is like starting today. It's not going to be perfect. It never is. And like, you probably don't want your kid to learn from a perfect person, because then
Who is that?
Yeah. Well, and then when they have times when they're not perfect, they're kind of measuring themselves up to this impossible standard. So I think there's like beauty in the imperfection.
Yeah.
Actually, and that's like a kind of a beautiful thing to pass on to your kids. But I think, like the place to start is with yourself. Like we've been talking about that, and I think about it was really hard for me to take care of myself.
Yeah.
Especially those early days, and it's like you want to pour all your energy into your kids.
Yeah.
And like they are like I truly believe every parent loves their child.
Yes, me too.
And when that can't happen, there's something significant that's got in the way of that happening. That's just been my experience working with families. When a parent's not able to show up for kids in a certain way, there's a reason.
Yeah. And a lot of times that reason is their own mental health.
Yeah, or addictions, intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
Maybe financial reasons.
Yeah.
And so I think what kind of brought me peace was to think about, instead of this pressure of like, take care of yourself, like have a like self-care, that kind of stuff that was like fluffy, I saw it more as like a deeper meaning of like, I am like taking care of my son's mother, which is going to allow her to like continue to mother him and take good care of him. And I thought that was something I was like, okay, I can get behind that. Like there's purpose in that.
Okay. So you just said so many things again that I love. You just said that you had to come to realization that you were taking care of your son's mother.
Yeah.
That's you.
Yeah.
So why are you saying it that way? Why are you saying you're taking care of your son's mother instead of saying, well, I'm taking care of me?
I think sometimes like I didn't grow up in like a place where that was prioritized, and
where me was prioritized?
Yeah, me, or like I think my mom was a mom who did everything for everybody.
Yeah.
And so this was a way that I could understand it and kind of get behind it and do what needed to be done. And,
yeah. It sounds so powerful when you say it that way, because when I sit here and I think about it in a way of, okay, Kieran, you're taking care of your boy's mother. And I'm like, wait, I'm literally getting goosebumps as we're talking. I'm like, that's me. But all of a sudden when I say it that way, I have like this compassion for myself.
Yeah.
Like I look at myself as a human that's just trying to do the best that she can. And sometimes she has no idea what that is. And it also, when I talk like that or hear it that way, it's like less intimate.
Yeah.
It's less blame on myself, but looking at myself in this other light, because I would give you so much more compassion than I would give myself naturally. And
Totally.
It's amazing to hear you just like, words are so powerful. Language is so powerful when we move a letter or a word in a certain way, and that can break or make a communication moment. And so to hear you say that, I think that's amazing. And it also sounds like you then got to go back to your childhood and do some repair work as well.
Yeah. And like it opened the door to different conversations like
right.
within my family.
Totally.
And I think like I think of those like early days when, or even now when there's times it's like, wow, like I look in the mirror and I'm like, ooh, like I look crazy. Or, like that postpartum hair is like a mess.
Yeah.
And like my son doesn't care.
Yeah.
Like he looks at me like I am the most amazing, beautiful, fantastic person he's ever seen in his life. And I'm like, okay, like that's like real love.
That is
and
real
that
love.
Is like attachment and connection.
And just like a sparkling moment, right?
Yeah.
Like just a moment where you can appreciate that fills your bucket, I think, probably for the next time when you can't look in the mirror even.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't believe I said that or did that, or I'm having such an off day. But to fill, put these beautiful moments in a bucket so that we can use them later when we're running low on our fuel. And I think that's really well said.
Yeah. And I think for me, I try to, because I can be distracted like any parent. I have a lot of responsibility. Like my job is pretty full on. I have like a lot of competing like adult demands, like being on the condo board, like all of these different things that I'm doing, and I can get in my head. Like that's just who I am as a person. And there are times when I notice, I'm not connected, I'm not attuned, I'm not present in this moment. And then he will like remind me, and then I, instead of beating myself up, I just like, okay, go back to what's in front of me.
Right.
And, we'll play little trucks and that kind of thing.
Totally. So you just used a word, attuned. What do you mean by that?
So I think of attunement as like when you're dialed into like somebody's radio station.
Okay.
So like each person has like a frequency, and you're kind of like zoned in, connected to that person.
Okay.
So like when my little guy falls and like hurts himself, and he has that moment where he's like not sure if he's hurt, not sure if he's okay. I'm like dialed in, trying to like reassure, like, it's okay, buddy, like, good job, like, you're okay. And then if he needs to be like scooped up and like comforted, then I'm able to do that. But I think it's like the skill I developed like first as a therapist of like zoning on like people's emotion,
like when you're in a session with clients. Yeah
And so I use that with my son, and that helps us like be connected and me to like understand his needs.
Right. As you're talking, I'm like, holy crap, there's so many times that I have not been attuned to my kid's radio station.
Me too, for sure.
And I like, what are some ways that I or people, we can do that more so that we're more connected to what's happening and seeing this before us, because we're distracted, phones, and got to make supper and all these things. And, like literally the story that comes to my mind is when I'm trying to help out now that I'm not working, I cook.
Yeah. Nice.
So I help every now and then. And, you're in the kitchen trying to get everything ready, and your kids are telling you something and your back is to them, and you're like, but it's kind of like, I'm kind of on autopilot.
Yeah.
Where and my kids sometimes will say, it's interesting. They've said it a lot less since I've stopped working. But they used to be like, Mom's not even listening. We can say whatever and, fart this and butt that. Yeah. Totally a test. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, know what's going on? Because in my head, I have all these sorts of things. So what have you seen at work or even in your life at home? Like, what are some ways that you can practice that more?
Well, I think the first part is you have to be regulated, right? If you're at a state of like high anxiety, or like for me, I'm a person whose sleep is important. If I'm tired, it's harder to attune to people. Yeah. It requires more effort, I find, for me personally. So it's like kind of figuring out what you need to be able to be present. And then I think it's
like what? Like what are some things that you think one would think about that they would need to be present? Like you said, sleep. So that's what you're saying.
Like sleep, like watching your stress levels.
Okay.
I think, those are the two that really like come to mind about being able to manage.
So like I am really stressed right now because I have this bill I have to pay, and that I'm trying to figure out how to put together the dollars and the bills to be able to pay that. And so my attention is going to that. And then there's my child before me that, needs something from me. So how can I unplug from that for a second and bring myself to a place where I'm meeting them where they need to be? Because that stressful bill is going to up my anxiety, which is going to make me likely, in my world, yell. So like, what is it? Like, what are you asking?
Yeah, because you're already like at your threshold.
Exactly. Like I again, going back to the brain, I try to teach my kids when when I get that way, okay, so mom used the back of her brain. The back of the brain is where the emotions come from, and, you know, our fight, flight, or freeze. So those are trauma responses that some of us that have experienced trauma may regularly start to go to, because that's a common known feeling. So I'm either going to run away from this conversation, I'm going to just hide and be fearful and not tell you what I need, or I'm going to like walk towards it, but maybe not in the best kind of way. I'm going to fight. I'm in the mode now. And for me, learning those, because I have experienced quite a bit of childhood trauma, and I've been processing that over the years, and some days are better than others. But for me, learning that my go-to, I'm the oldest in my household, so I always was a protector of my siblings. So I'm usually and you've seen me at work. Yeah. I'm a walk and run and fight, right? And sometimes that doesn't work for me, because now I'm using that, you know, irrational part of my brain that's angry and wants to yell and whatnot, versus, you know, finding a way to walk. So I would say to my kids, I kind of do this thing from the back of the brain, and we're going to walk our way to the front of the brain, because that's where we would be able to use the thinking and critical thinking. So like, what, me saying this to my kid, what's that really going to mean? Some days I can be there and think, okay, if I respond that way, first thing in the morning, he's off to a crappy day, and here we go, versus, you know, I woke up tired or whatnot. So am I making sense? Like, is that, you know, it's been like I said, I've been a long minute since I've been in work mode and talk that way, but I do that to help myself remember I'm back here, so nothing good is going to come out of this.
And that's like exactly right. The first step is to notice. You can't make any change if you're not realizing what's happening. So I think that's the important thing, and what I talk to a lot of families about, if there's some kind of behavior change that they're wanting to make, they put so much pressure on themselves to like do it right out of the gate. So what I talk about is like I'm not a golfer, but I'm told it's a golf term, like a mulligan. It's like a do-over. So it's like you notice, and so like for me, maybe I'm my son like is hitting the dog, and I like lose it and like, don't hit the dog, and it comes out like really intense, and that's not how I wanted to show up. Then I'll say, oh, sorry about that, mom is getting frustrated. I'm gonna take a minute, come back to it, like hands are not for hitting. We don't hit things we love, like our puppy. That kind of teaching. But if I came at it like very aggressively and intense, he would not like that message does not match. Right?
It's like it's disconnected along the way, right? It's intercepted with these emotions, and now he's like, oh, what you're really saying is keep doing that. You know? So and I think that's hard, because sometimes as parents, we want to, we understand that this response, or my temper, or whatever it is not the best response ever, but it's my go-to. It's all I know. And then at the same time, what I hear you saying is, when you start to pay attention, so like how do I build awareness? Are you saying how would I know? I guess like that's the thing. Like, how would I know that I need to be more attuned? How would I know that I need to be aware that I could parent in a different way and it's not helpful to my kid?
Well, I think trying things out. Thinking
trial
about
and error.
Trial and error. Are you getting the results you want? Like, if you're getting the results that you want with your kid, and you feel good about the way that you parent, even though other people have different opinions, it's probably working for you. Of course, like, think about if you're parenting from a place of like abuse, which is not going to teach your kid anything. It's going to teach them to be fearful. That's like, we know that that's not helpful. It doesn't, inducing children to be fearful does not translate to learning. Like, that's, they can't, if they're in the fear part of their brain, they're not going to be able to use the front part, like the prefrontal cortex, to be able to learn and like integrate that information. So it's, you're not getting the desired response that you're hoping for.
Right. And some, like, this speaks a lot to me, because coming from my community, the Indian community, my upbringing, my cousins, seeing my parents' upbringing, and people around me, a lot of it is fear-based. Like you come immigrate from a different country, and you're just trying to survive in that third world country. And now you're immigrating to North America, and you're kind of doing the same. You're trying to survive here too. And integration for immigrants, in my mind, is terrible. Let's open the doors, which I think is so important to allow people from different countries. But we struggle to help people understand what it means to live in this part of the world, and what can be helpful to you. So people are figuring it out. And growing up, fear-based parenting was how, and I think a lot of kids out there even today would say, yeah, that's how it is. And probably some parents would say, well, I turned out fine. Like that's how it was. And I think where it's detrimental is that I know for me, there were a lot of things that, like you said, it's almost like arrested development in some ways because of the fear-based parenting. I see it now if I took a personality test at, work, people do that. What kind of leader are you? I am a rule follower. I am a rule follower because I knew if I don't stay in line and if I don't follow the rules, then, I might get hit, or I'm going to get yelled at or get in trouble. And so it's interesting because sometimes we think we've dealt with our childhood, and then as adults, it's still coming out in all sorts of unsafe or maybe even unproductive ways, and we don't even realize it. Yeah. So for me, I was so grateful working where we worked because we are constantly being challenged to grow as staff, because if we don't do that, how are we going to support clients? It's a parallel, we always say, process. If I'm really good at this skill, then I'll be able to explain it to others. And I think you must see families coming into your space that do operate from that fear-based parenting. And can you share some stories or examples of what you've learned in your time as a therapist?
Yeah, I think, people's initial instincts is to come down hard on people who are using fear-based parenting and saying that's wrong, that's bad, and that's abusive, which even though that might be true, I don't think that's effective to get somebody to change their mind. So I'll kind of, depending on the context and the circumstance, of course I'm not permissive of parents being abusive, but saying something like, I can appreciate that that's probably how you were parented. There's certain elements of that where, I was parented the same, and look at us, we turned out all right.
But I don't want to turn out all right. I want my kids to turn out better.
Yeah. Well, and I would say it's just ineffective.
Yeah.
It just doesn't fit with what we know about research, brain development, parenting. We've come so far. We've made lots of advances in our world. Think of technology is completely different. I remember having one computer in my house on dial-up, and now I have a little computer in my hand. Yes. So it's things have changed so much since when I was growing up in the 90s. Yeah. We know more, so let's do better, just like we do with our technology. And often I find parents will come along. Yeah. Once that dialogue is opened in a way that is not about shame or using fear or making those parents feel like garbage, because I operate from a premise that all parents love their children. Yeah. Something's getting in the way. Totally. So let's talk about
totally. And parents fear, I think. You're a social worker. So people, I think, sometimes assume that you work for the government and you're a child protection worker. Yeah. Your job is to take kids out of people's homes. Yeah. And, I've come across a lot of people while I was going to school, and a lot of family members, and I'm not a social worker, but till this day I'm a fraud social worker, because I have a lot of community members that just assume I'm a social worker. I'm like, yes, that's what I am. Yeah. Because the whole mental health counseling thing, we're just starting to get to a place where people are willing to talk, and I've had a few brave people come on to share some stories. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is that sometimes when we come from that place, what would you want to tell people today in terms of, if I thought in my household something is happening with my family and we needed help and we need a counselor, and we go there and we tell them that we are not perfect parents and we yell at our kids and we've hit them, and because fighting over electronics and whatever, should I be afraid that you're going to call child welfare and take my kids away from me? Because I think a lot of people out there don't ask for help because they think that they're going to get punished. Like back to that fear-based thinking of, well, you're going to just take my kids, or you're going to tell me what I'm doing is wrong.
Or even for some people who are new to Canada, they're worried it's going to impact like their immigration status.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So that's like a real barrier. And I think you're in a sticky spot because, you know, like mental health professionals, as like anybody in this province, has an obligation to report abuse. But I think the way that this is kind of looked on is like, do people want to, like, do parents want to learn better and do better? You know, is there like a skill or something that's missing that kind of led to that behavior? Because eventually, like, these things come out eventually.
Yeah. Well, yeah, a secret isn't really, I mean, what's the best kept secret?
Yeah.
I don't know. Like it only is kept for so long. And I think what you're saying really is important in that, like, parents love their kids. And so we want to do better. And when we're in a place where we can start to challenge ourselves in a way of, is this what I want to leave my kid with? Or starting to understand when I yell at my son or before he leaves the house for school and, you know, I put that kind of stress on him, what will that look like if it's one time or every time? And back to the brain, at a very young age, the brain is so busy paving pathways back and forth, right? Those little receptors that you did this and I responded this way. Now it's in my brain. And now every time you respond that way with me, it's going to, I guess the easiest way I can say it, it's going to become like that pathway is going to become more and more and more strong. That response back and forth is going to be hard to undo later. It's not that it can't be. I think we can learn from it, but it's like I still go back to things that I know better, but it's in my head. It's in there. And I think the best thing I can do is be responsible for myself, because I'm also not saying that because we were brought up in a certain way, it's okay with what's happening. Like, I'm not trying to justify something that happened to me as a child. And at the same time, what I'm trying to say is I, as a person, just want to do better. Like, I want to be a good human, and I want my kids to be good humans. I think we could use more of those in this world.
Yeah, and I think for a parent to get to that place, they have to be vulnerable. And that's like a hard thing, especially if that wasn't role modeled in your family or the country you came from. Like, I think people have really good reasons why they're not vulnerable.
Yeah.
Probably because it wasn't safe.
Right.
So finding those spaces where you can be safe, I think, is really, really important. And like, I'm kind of like reflecting on at the beginning of my career, it was very rare that we would have families coming asking for help where they were like new immigrants and connected to like a culture that wasn't like a typical white Canadian.
Yeah, it was pretty much 90% of our clients were white. Yeah. And then you had this small, tiny percentage of all the other minorities put in one category because there was only so many.
Yeah, it was very rare. Where now, I think, like, fast forward 15 years later, you know, social media has completely changed the game. And, you know, with awareness and stigma shifting, we're also at probably like a different generation of people having children. And like, I work with many families who, you know, are new to Canada or first generation, that like conflict between, you know, the old traditional generation and this teenager who's kind of like straddling both worlds and having like, you know, this almost like identity crisis and seeing their parents' culture as like old, and they are looking at Canadian culture, wanting to fit in with their peers, and it's something that's been kind of fascinating to watch over time.
It is interesting, and one of the interesting things about it is some of these kids that you're talking about that are first generation or also immigrating at a young age, when they're integrating into the Canadian culture, and like you said, social media and friends, people have this language of mental health. Like I was just saying, like my cousin's kids, and like many other kids are seeing counselors. So kids start to develop a language, and so you're this new kid at the school and you're like, what do you mean you're talking about these feelings? I want to do that too. And so then these kids end up being further ahead in some ways than their household is. Yeah. And I think that can be also looked at as defiance, because a family's not quite at a place of being curious about what is this mental health thing we're talking about. Like, we don't have mental health issues where we come from, is often what I hear. And, they just like the gluten allergy, mental health is like a gluten allergy.
Or for some countries, mental health is something that's like very scary, and people are killed.
Yeah, because you're crazy.
Yeah.
Or some spirit has disrupted your... that's gotten into you. And so we've seen some families that have come to our place of work where the family is from a different culture and they're saying, my kid is possessed. And as a team, I remember we're like, okay, we have to process, just like you're saying as a parent, we have to start with ourselves. We tell ourselves this at work. We have to start with ourselves. Like, what does hearing this from a parent mean to you? Because in Canada, that we don't talk about mental health that way, but from a different cultural perspective, that's what their narrative is, that there's a spirit that has possessed their child and now their child's crazy. And I think some of the times that we had some families, I think we are never the ones to tell someone that their story should be different or change. People's story is their story. But if we're walking in there and validating, and by validating, I mean like listen to someone, and it could be the most wildest thing you're hearing. I had a dad once, they were from the Middle East, and he had his daughter, and he's like, what do you expect me to do? Because where I come from, she would be killed. She's having sex. She's doing all the things that girls in my country don't do. And now I am being threatened because I'm not being a good father and, disciplining her in the way that I should. And he's telling me that he's tied her to a chair and locked her in a room because that's him actually keeping her safe from being killed. And I remember I was a brand new young staff, and I that father taught me so much about what it means to listen and understand that when I'm validating you as a father in front of me and saying, this must be hard for you to even tell me this, I'm not agreeing with what you're saying. I don't have to agree with what your story is. And I think sometimes we're so quick to put our own story on other people and say, but this is the way it is, or it's not like that in my house, or sure, you've worked with other people, but it's different I've tried that. And all those things are, fine. I think people are at a different place and maybe not at a place to start to be open and curious about what's happening. But at the same time, I think just because I'm validating someone, it doesn't mean I have to agree with them. I'm just hearing them. And if we start there, people start to calm down.
Well, and I think what you're doing in that moment is validating the emotional experience. You're not validating the action.
Totally.
Right?
Totally.
And that is like a skill you can use with your kids. Like
yes.
your kid doing something like nuts. I don't know, like my little guy having like a tantrum on the floor, screaming because I'm not letting him have a cookie because it's dinner time.
Hey, that's a worth tantrum.
Yeah,
I have those
right?
too still.
Yeah, yeah. But me saying like, I know you're frustrated. You really wanted the cookie. Is different than like, okay, yeah, you can have the cookie because I know as a parent that's my limit. Like, you are not going to have this sweet before you have your dinner. Like, eventually, maybe we get to a place where we just eat something for the love of all things. Yeah, just like eat it. But, you don't start off at that place.
Totally.
And I think that's something that you can use every day is
Yeah.
validating the emotion, because emotions are individual. Like, I can't tell how you're feeling right now. I have an idea because I'm like attuned and connected to you in this moment. But I always ask questions and I'm checking in to be like, am I getting this right? Am I getting this right? And that person feels seen and heard
Totally.
when they're having that experience.
And I that brings me back to that woman at that eyebrow place. That's what she helped me realize in the moment, because I didn't realize I was doing it, is I was helping my son create his own thinking, critical thinking, and asking him what he thought. And sometimes, again, that whole, speak only when you're spoken to with children, if we can start to help them make sense of these things and start to understand what I want that cookie and I can't have it. Okay, fine, you can't have it, but he has a right to be upset about it.
Yeah.
He wants to have that cookie. And anyone that denies me my cookie and them, I'm going to be upset too. And I think sometimes, again, that fear-based parenting, and it's not that we're parenting because out of our child in a fearful way. It's because we're also afraid of a lot of things that are going on. And so sometimes what happens is just stop. We want to stop the behavior.
Yeah, especially if it's about safety.
Totally. Like, this has to stop. And you're right. When I'm not talking about safety. I'm talking about the tantrum. Like,
okay.
You're more, and I thank you for clarifying that, because you're when it's safety, you're right. You got to do something quick. But in your story with your son, I think sometimes what happens is and maybe some other parents too, and I remember working with some staff at work too, is I want to stop the behavior versus responding to him and saying, sorry, you're frustrated. You can't have the cookie. Go on now, have your tantrum, feel how you're feeling. But we want to take the feeling away. And I think it's important for kids to know what they're feeling.
Yeah.
And as they get older, they kind of start to make more sense of it. But when you're told you can't feel that, you have to stop the behavior. Like,
the feeling just is like...
Totally.
Like, it just goes inside.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll come out in other ways.
Yeah.
Versus you're safe. If you're going to have a tantrum, go for it. And there's times where I'm so good at that. And then there's times where I'm like, oh God, what did you do? Like you could have this could have been a 5-minute conversation with your kid. Yeah. Now we're all being held hostage by the fact that the cookie's not happy, whatnot. And like you said, you learn as you go. It's trial and error. And okay, that worked this time. What can we do different? And I think if you are in a home where you're co-parenting, I think it's helpful to have a good team. How do we become a good team so that we can go to each other for, advice, or like, how would you handle this? Or I'm about to go have this conversation and let him know he can't have electronics. Back me up or be there, because, and if you're not in a home where you're co-parenting, I hope that you have access to a friend or someone that you can text or reach out to and say, I'm about to have this really difficult conversation with my kid, back me up or help me out or whatnot.
Yeah. Or even to say, like, check in with you. Like, how did that go?
Yeah.
Like, what do you need? Or even to debrief about, like, that didn't go very well.
Yeah.
Or, wow, that went amazing. Like, how do I do that again?
Yeah.
I think there's always value in deconstructing and like thinking about an interaction in your mind about, where could you zig when you zag, and that's I learned that, being trained as a therapist, is every session I always reflect and think, oh, I could have done that differently, or that would have been better, or I worded that weird. And I think has served me in my parenting.
I would that strategy,
self-reflection,
totally. And how many athletes use that? How many sports teams use that? How many performers, like people that are performing at the top of their game, they don't go to the Stanley Cup finals and lose or win and then just shut the door and get on with it. Like, they go back and they play those plays again. They talk about what they can do different, and you can see athletes progressing over time because they're going back and learning how they could be better. And I think that's amazing to when we can do that. And I know for Carrie and I, the times that we can go back and say, okay, that felt really good, or that was crappy. And, and also being open to each other, because there's times where Carrie will tell me exactly where I could have zigged instead of zagged. And I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
I don't
You
want
weren't there.
to. No, don't tell me, please. Yeah, sorry, leave a message.
Yeah.
But I think it's so important because we're challenging each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's support. That's supporting each other and having conversations like this. That support is, okay, is this the right thing? Maybe it is for you. Could you do it different? Or asking people, okay, how could this happen in a different way, or has that happened for you? I remember when my kids were your kids' age and even younger, I would compare myself to every mom in my kids' age group because, someone's kids walking at 9 months and my kids were a year and a half. And I think you start to, when you do that, you start to learn my kids doing their own thing. Every one of those kids are doing their own thing. And as long as they're in the big, kind of window,
the accepted range,
right? Like where we don't have to go seek professional help because we're missing something, that detrimental. Mm-hmm. I think as long as we're recognizing my kid's going to learn to walk at his pace, and remembering that as my kid's getting older, he's learning to walk at his pace. And sometimes I think my husband and I are so many paces ahead, and we have to look back and say, shit, we're like miles ahead of these kids. We got to back it up and meet them where they're at. Like, I want Xander to know how to not say that thing. And that ain't going to happen until I back up and, like you said, deconstruct where that came from, what happened. And it's hard. It's hard starting with yourself. But I also feel like when I do that, I gain so much more.
Yeah.
For the next day or whenever.
Yeah, and I think it's like you're stepping into like that vulnerability. It's scary at first, but it's so rewarding for everybody involved.
Right.
If you can really kind of have that courage and bravery.
Totally. And sometimes it's, okay, my job as a parent, Carrie and I are always reminding ourselves, our job as a parent is to be their coach. We're teaching them because they have zero clue how they're doing everything for the first time around us.
Yeah.
And so we're forgetting that because we're so disconnected from when we were there. And again, that's that going back and being like, oh, right, this is a part of the brain now that's going to focus on emotions. Hence, because I was like, where is Xander at developmental? Oh, that makes sense why we've had a really rough week.
Yeah. And I think, too, for parents who have had traumatic experiences themselves as children, they might not remember what it was like to be that age. And so like reading about it is something that I think can be really helpful. Mm-hmm. Getting feedback from other people is really helpful. And like you're doing all of this to help shape your child into like an amazing, incredible human that they're going to be.
Right. And I think you said it best. Like that's the end game. That's what we're all striving for. Yeah. And back to your point of all parents love their kids. So we all want that. We just get lost along the way. Yeah. And
parenting is about teaching too. Mm-hmm. I think we forget about that. It's not to correct and to discipline. It's like to build skills. Yeah. And you have to teach kids that they're not just like born as like empathic little beings who can manage difficult feelings. Like that's like a complicated process where the brain has to build that up through thousands of different repetitions and interactions with people. Totally. And that's really cool that you get to be like, I guess, a brain architect in the sense. I love when you say that. Brain architect. I love that. You're helping brings this meaning brain. To it. It does. Yeah. It's like bigger than just like you wanted a cookie before dinner, and don't you know that I like worked my butt off to make you this nutritious meal? Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Even, and it's like, okay, how do I process that? Because that's how I feel. But at the same time, my kid isn't telling me that, this, I don't appreciate your cooking. That comes later in the later years. We were not there yet. I think also, having couple kids, like I'm a one of three in my child with my siblings, and I think sometimes for me, like I have two kids, and what happened the first time with my older son, and you're in this environment and that whole nature versus nurture, and it's interesting watching. I was talking to a friend the other day. I'm like, it's so interesting because my almost 9-year-old, I remember where Xander was at, and they're at different places.
And sometimes my sister and I even say, oh, you know, like, it's like you parent the same way and you do all these things. And I remember the other day with this friend and my sister were like, you know what, though? We don't parent the same ways. I think we think we're raising these, I've raised all 3 of these kids in my home and how come one does this and one does that? And I think, again, when we're not attuned and we can't always be, we miss what was going on for us at that time. Like, for you to talk about what, you know, pre and post pregnancy was like for you is going to help you understand what may be going on for your baby at an early age if you weren't able to connect in a certain way, or you were learning how to connect, or maybe, you know, moms that experience postpartum. That's you're at a different place, and maybe, you know, loss of a job, there's some kind of grief occurring. Life happens, and life doesn't happen the same way. When my mom and dad had me, and then they had my sister, and then they had my brother, they were also growing, and where they were at by the time they had my brother, they'd learned a lot of things. You know, my sister and I were their trial and error, right? And so they grew, they learned a lot of things, and it's interesting watching them now with their grandkids. You know, you're like, why were you not that way with me?
Oh, you have McDonald's money now. How fascinating.
Oh, interesting. Oh, you're okay. He spilt that. Interesting, right? And I think they've like, just my parents, I think, seeing how far they've come, and that always brings me to a place of there's hope. There's hope that we can grow. You know, there's hope that it doesn't have to be, this is the way it is. It can be a different way, but like you said, I have to be brave and vulnerable. So kind of go back and look at how did it even get to this place, to see where I want to go forward. Anything for you, like anything that you wish I had asked today, or anything that you want to share that we didn't get to? Because as you can see, I always have these notes with my dividers, and I write a lot, but we don't always go through all my things. And and I also think these conversations are all that I've been having are all door openers. So if folks that are listening want to learn more, and if you would love to have Angie back, you know, I'll tell you in a minute where you can reach me so that we can carry this conversation. I never want people listening to think this is it. There's so much more we can't or haven't covered. And if people want to hear more, let us know. But for you, anything that you wish to share that we didn't touch on today?
Well, I think, like, talking about being absent as a parent is something that I've kind of been thinking about. Like, I'm a present parent, but there are times when, you know, maybe I'm distracted. We kind of talked about that, but I was reading a book by Dave Grohl.
Angie, my sister and I are such Foo Fighters fans. He's the lead singer. He was the drummer
of
Nirvana. And then so he's the lead singer of, and he, man, can put on a show. And this book came out. I'm hoping someone will buy it for me for Christmas, but so you're reading it right now.
I just finished it. My friend, she recommended it to me, and she always has great recommendations. So it's called The Storyteller, and he was talking about his relationship with his dad. And his dad wasn't always present in his life, and he said that even in his dad's absence, he was like shaped by that presence or lack of presence, and that in turn changed how he wanted to parent his own children, and just the lengths that he would go to as this like rock star, jet setting all over the world, and like racing back from like Australia back to California to be part of these like important childhood moments, and then racing back to go back to the rock star life, and how like humbling that was, and for him, you know, he made that conscious choice because he wanted something different than what he experienced, and he talks about part of what taught him about that is he was very connected to his mother, and I think that's something that's like pretty cool to like think about as you think about how you were parented, maybe what you want to do differently, what you want to keep, and you're kind of like building your own way of being in the world as a parent.
Well, and I just think that quote, like you said, even in his absence, I was shaped by his presence for better or worse. And that's such a powerful statement. And I think really what I hear in that is he's owning his childhood. He's being in charge. He can't control the things that happen, but he's taking charge of his story and taking responsibility. And sometimes we say, well, that happened to me, and I am this way because of that. And while that's very true, I think at some point in our life, as we become young adults, we have to start to take responsibility for what happened to us. And hopefully we have people around us that can help us, because it's always going to be with us. So it's either get ahead and do something about it, or it's going to show up in, like, cats. I hate cats. Cats just show up in random places and jump out at you. And I think sometimes that's our childhood or our trauma, where we're like, I wasn't prepared for that. My trauma cat. Seriously, I wasn't prepared for this. Yeah. There she is. So I think that's lovely that he's recognizing that. And I'm sure there's, like, you know, like, how does that resonate with you as a therapist and with the families that you work with?
I think I think about, like, making those conscious choices as a parent. And also there's, like, this parallel healing that kind of happens to consciously decide to do something different for your child that maybe wasn't done for you. And you end up finding peace yourself in, like, making that different choice. And I think that's pretty cool. I do. I agree. I think that's beautiful for anyone that can get to that place. And because sometimes when that happens, it's like we get this voice in our head, or we worry about those people that aren't in a place that want to grow, and that what are they thinking? And they're thinking, oh, you think you're better than me? You think that, you know, it almost comes off like you're doing something bad because you're trying to better yourself. And while other important people in our life, whether it's family members or siblings and friends, they're still where they're at. And that's not a bad thing. That's where they're at. But you want to do something different and learn from that. And I think sometimes we can get treated like you're not a great person for doing that because you're denying something. And I don't think that's what he's saying. He's saying I'm accepting something. Yeah. And I'm you know, like I said earlier, like my cousin and I were saying, we don't want to turn out fine. We want our kids to turn out better than we did. You know, we hear that a lot from the other generations. Well, I turned out fine. Okay, but I don't want to turn out fine. But I think they also had that goal for their kids of wanting to give their kids better, more than what they had. Yeah. And so it's just what that looks like now is different.
Right. Story changes as we evolve, as life goes on. Right. So I'm glad you shared that. I think that's a really nice little quote, and that's a good reminder that I need to get this book and read it. Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of going through, you know, I didn't read for years because at work we have to read articles and read this workbook and that workbook. And so I just started to hate reading. Yeah.
Graduate school really
oh gosh, I can imagine.
And it was, one of the staff I worked with, they were talking about, I read this fiction book. And I was like, okay, maybe it's,
give it a go, time. Right? Yeah. Well, yeah. And since June, I can read a book a month, and I've been getting into a lot of Indian authors that are sharing a lot of stories about their childhood trauma and, you know, parenting. Some are like a mother, grandmother, and the grandkid, and just reading some of these. And it's like a lot of, I have a lot of appreciation for these authors that are finding a way to put these traumatic stories in words and how they can touch us. I read this one book, A Place for Us, and I'm like, I can't believe how much I cried. Yeah. Just crying, because you're like, again, you know, when you're, like you said, when you're aware and you're open to wanting to better, I find these signs just come at you. Like you see these opportunities more. Right. They're not so missed anymore. So you're reading this thing in the book that has nothing to do with you, but somehow you're like, is someone writing this for me? Yeah. Because this is how I feel. Or think.
I feel that way about Taylor Swift.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Her new album. Yeah. Oh, her new album. Even Carrie's been listening to it. Oh, nice. Yeah. What's your favorite song on that track?
I really like Anti-Hero. Because it's like, it has lots of commentary about mental health.
Yes. Yeah. I agree. So many.
Bejeweled also.
Bejeweled is a good one too. Yeah.
What's your favorite?
I also like Lavender Haze. Yeah. For other reasons. Yeah. But I also like Anti-Hero too. I think it's like kind of letting your supervillain come out in a way, you know, like, oh yeah, I appreciate you saying that and going there and talking about those things. And I think people like her and that we're more inclined to, I think, follow. I think it's nice for her to take that responsibility and want to talk about well-being and mental health. And again, especially since in the last few years, COVID and that whole pandemic impacted a lot of, I mean, at work, we saw the numbers go up, how many people that said, I would have never found myself in the emergency room seeking psychiatric help for my kid if it hadn't been for COVID. Because I think for some people, it's like this noise level dials down and you're all stuck in this house together and you can't get away to go to that place to eat dinner. You can't go to the movies. You can't do these things. Some people can't even go to work. And you start to pay attention to, it's almost like the walls, like when you're sitting in a room and, you know, you're like looking at empty walls and it's like that about yourself. Like, I think I need to rebuild this wall. I think I need to paint this wall. I think I need to tear this down. And I think seeing a lot of families coming through and talking about their pain in that way and having celebrities like a Taylor Swift or Dave Grohl start to talk about how being a rock star isn't all the things. I'm still a human and I'm still trying to find an artistic way make sense of my trauma or my childhood and who I want to be, right? So good role models that you pick there. Yeah. So I like that. So back to, you know, anything else that you wanna add? I think we could probably keep going.
Yeah, probably forever.
Well, and I'm hoping that you will come back and we can talk about this further, because I really appreciated having you here. I think you shared a lot of insight today. I think you also talked a lot about vulnerability, but also shared a lot in how you talked about your experience as a mom, your experience as a therapist, and coming on and sharing your stories, as I'm not perfect and
I'm actually a mess.
A hot mess.
Yeah.
and I hope for others, you know, that'll resonate, you know, with. And so again, like I said a few minutes earlier, these conversations that I'm having are door openers. These are things that are on my mind. And I know there are things on other people that are listening on your minds. And so please reach out to me if you have any further questions about this episode with Angie Hick. I can be reached at info@mfupodcast.com, as well as on my Instagram page at MFU Podcast. And when I say door openers, what I mean by that is, please let me know if you want to know anything further, if you want to come on and share your story. If you have any other questions, I would be happy to help. And lastly, Angie, if there's one thing you could have your listeners today leave with, what would you hope that they would leave with? What's that one thing?
Probably that attachment opportunities are everywhere. I think of it as like there's this bus in Calgary called the Number One Bus, and it goes like from one end of the city to the other. I
used to ride that bus, the Forest one, right?
Yeah,
I used to ride that. Yeah.
That's like going like way back.
Yeah.
But the Number One Bus usually like it comes quite often, and attachment opportunities are like that. If you miss one, like don't beat yourself up. Just grab the next bus.
That's really well said. Thank you for that, Ange. Again, thank you for coming on today, and we'll leave it at that and hope that you come back soon. Yeah. Alrighty.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.